If you like our work, you like our talk, and you love film, you can support us and keep us caffeinated at buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. That's buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos, or scroll down to the link on our Apple Podcast page on the podcast app. Many thanks to Alan Landberg, Spitshine Tommy, and others for taking this trip with us tonight into the continued cinema of life and afterlife. So, what happens after you die? Maybe, as the saying says, your life flashes before your eyes, playing on that big screen that's the back of your eyelids. Perhaps it's the end credits you see, perhaps the title card. I heard that breath of life from you, Rick. What do you say?
It's a leap, man. Sometimes you can be tired. Sometimes you can be tied down so strongly towards your beliefs that it's difficult to take that leap with other people. And then sometimes you want to imagine. You want to imagine the beauty of the possibilities of life. Cinema has this really interesting power. It for those of us who are sold out completely to it, it's the world. It makes sense. It grabs a hold of you and it shows you experiences that maybe you would never have yourself. Sometimes it can be fear, anger, distrust, and then the varied states of the mind. When I watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it took me years to get to the point where I could see it because I wanted to see it in a theater, and I particularly wanted to see it at the Cinerama Dome
with someone on acid.
That's right. I wanted that big. I wanted an experience as close to what Stanley Kubrick had originally intended back in the late 60s when he directed the film. Mid 60s, late 60s, whenever it was. Here we find ourselves with a film that I believe is heavily influenced by Kubrick. Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void. And yet I find myself just... It's interesting because I've read some of the reviews of this film, and I read them after the film. I walked into the film with no real knowledge of the film itself, except that it was controversial, and no real understanding of Gaspar Noé's filmmaking sensibilities, except for Irreversible, 2002, I think. This is 2006, I believe. 2009. 2009. Yeah. So I think Irreversible might have been 2005. Either way, Irreversible was all that I had to reference Gaspar Noé, and that is a film that I continue to be on the fence about. I think it's a good film. I don't know if it's a film that I ever want to go back to, although I know I have to at some point, because with images and subject matter of that sort, it's when you're affected a certain way, it's almost impossible to not go back to it, to totally and completely understand, to the best of your ability at least, why you feel as such. Enter the Void just left me bored, to tell you the truth. And as I went through the film, as I was sitting there watching it, I started to feel a bit insulted, because I took what was Gaspar Noé's storytelling points, and I couldn't help but believe that he was going out of his way to make his audiences uncomfortable without a true understanding of what it meant to the idea of what he was trying to do on screen. And in particular, I'm talking about one shot that comes down on a woman having an abortion. And I wasn't offended in any way. I wasn't disturbed. I wasn't disgusted. But I remember looking at it thinking, is that your intent? Are you trying to offend me? I'm offended by the attempt trying to offend me rather than any offense that I might take from the shot itself.
Okay.
So we're going to get
think that was his intent?
I don't know what his intent was, because the idea behind this film is a young man who is shot to death during a drug sting operation, and he levitates out of his body, basically. His spirit leaves his body and then follows his own life through various stages of memory, the present, the future, the past, all of that. And it's an interesting idea, but I thought the execution was, number one, boring. Number two, the point of view, not the point of view, the perspective in which it's told is interesting in the sense of what would a movie from a godlike position, a God's eye view, look like. Well, what I found out is it makes it incredibly difficult to get to the true emotion of a story. As you look at the top of people's heads as they move around in an experience, what you soon realize is not being able to see somebody's face robs you of a connection. And I think it robs you of a connection that is very important in a film like this. I think that after it's something where Gaspar Noé committed to, but I think rather quickly he should have realized this doesn't work. He does two things that he wanted to do: a first-person film where you experience everything from a spirit's perspective, the spirit that has left a dead body, the main character of the story. So you're seeing everything either from above or over the shoulder of this character, and you don't get a true sense of the people that are involved in it. And so I didn't find myself connected to the story. He creates far too much distance from the story and the viewer. And sometimes you need to see that in order to see why certain things don't work. I think it's simply an idea that just doesn't work. The execution doesn't work, but I don't know if telling it any other, because I don't know how interesting this movie would have been if it would have been told in a standard narrative.
Right, because it's not a standard narrative.
It's not a standard narrative, no.
So it's interesting because it's like last week with Thailand, we were talking about we just picked
Mm-hmm.
three elements: story, emotional content, and overall aesthetic, and how those three elements can lead into either a film being accessible or inaccessible.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in the context of the film Tideland, Terry Gilliam, but also in this tennis match or tennis game or whatever that we've been doing with Fallen Angels, Wings of Desire, Her, Olazar Baltazar, Io, Tree of Life, Solaris, Tideland, and now this. And this was my response to Tideland. But like we were talking about earlier, it's also, I think, my response to Tree of Life, because this is also something of a tree of life, tree of death, tree of afterlife film. And if we look at it from those perspectives, from story and emotion and then aesthetic, obviously, if you're familiar with Gaspar Noé's work, or you're not, but you want to know, well, I think the emotion, if it's a matter of, and this is something that he gets a lot, is how much of it is shock value, what is he doing, what's his relationship to the viewer. I think maybe that's more of the emotion, is like to directly get a response from you, to directly engage the viewer, not necessarily to have the viewer. I mean, in Irreversible, which we'll talk about at a different point, obviously you're feeling empathy, for example, for the Monica Bellucci character, and you're feeling all this variety of different emotions, but it's, I think he's much more of a director that is, that engages the viewer directly and challenges and presses buttons and all that. So I think the emotion is for that. In terms of this film, there is an emotional distance, not only because of the placement of the camera, but also because of it's the distance of life and death. It's the distance of being disengaged, engaged yet disengaged. And we'll get into the thematics of it and why that is. And kind of like, if you're going to make this kind of film, I don't think he could have made, well, I'm glad he made it the way he made it, as an experimental type of film. Whether you think that the experiment so-called worked or didn't, that's to be determined based on how you're playing with these elements of story, emotion, art, aesthetic. The story, the character, spoiler fucking alert, dies in the beginning portion of the, like 1/3 into the film. So now if you're going to talk about stakes, it's like, well, what happens now? The character's dead. Like what are the consequences of the film? It's not that kind of story.
No.
So that's already, if you're in it because you want, like, well, we were talking about Tom Cruise, and we will talk about him, because he has to, like, get the bomb before it explodes, like, and there's this time clock and blah 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 at the end of the film, and we're moving towards that. No, that's not what this is. This is a trip in every sense of the word. This is a journey. This is a different type of cinema, and it is, whether you think that worked or whatever, it is more as a parallel to a kind of tree of life story that meanders and moves around and is told visually, primarily visually, in a way that is not conventional to what American audiences are used to. So everyone's going to walk away with their own they're gonna walk into it with their own baggage, and they're gonna walk away with it with whatever the fuck they walk away with it.
As we all do with every film.
As we all do.
Yeah. So,
but particularly these films, I think films like this are harder because we are not, number one, conditioned to watch these kind of films. And then number two, it's these kind of films are, for multiple reasons, because of the length, because of the style, they're uncomfortable at many times, and they're jarring. So it's like you can find yourself in a mix between uncomfortable and also, like you said, bored because of the length and because you feel like it's not going anywhere or you don't know where it's going.
Well, okay, let me put this question to you. Do you think this film is a success, or because I know enjoyment doesn't really play a part in it?
It does play a part in it.
Not
but
always.
That's not really my primary focus.
Well, yeah. So it's like Tree of Life. Okay,
especially
so
if we're going to talk about it, you know what I mean? Like,
here's the thing.
My favorite movies are not necessarily whatever.
No, I get that.
Those are two different questions.
But that's the point that I'm talking about. With like a film like Tree of Life, I can't say that I necessarily enjoy the film in the sense that I walk out of it going, God damn, that's, but it's a film that I want to talk about. It's a film thematically that there are elements there that it raises questions, that it
and I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
I did enjoy it, and I want to talk about it.
Enjoy it, but it's almost like I'm trying to play the people's advocate here in what a typical movie watching experience is, which is not a movie.
This isn't that.
Which is not what what we are limited to.
Right, but this isn't that. So
this is what I'm saying. Like with Irreversible, I walked out of that theater feeling dirty, like feeling like I had seen something that I couldn't that I couldn't unsee, that would stick with me, that these ideas, and it was a visceral kind of painful viewing experience, one that I felt was excessive, but the acts in the film, the very real human acts that happen, if not on a daily basis, then definitely a weekly basis, were honest and real. And they were not. I know it's hard to imagine. If you take a rape scene like the rape scene in Irreversible, almost 11 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. Very painful to watch, very difficult, off-putting, but it's still artistic in comparison to something like Michael Winner's Death Wish 2, which is just salacious. Just you feel like Gaspar Noé's rape scene is meant to beat the shit out of you. Whereas Michael Winner's rape scene, I can imagine, is shot with the sense of Winner thinking, I want somebody to jerk off to this. No, see the movie. Absolutely. That's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what I thought when I saw, and perhaps it's because I saw that movie at such a young age, and we've talked about this in the past. This is something that continues to come. It's something that continues to haunt me over 4 decades. It's because I think I was that old when I saw it. It's still there, and I recently had the chance to watch Death Wish 2 again, and I watched that scene wondering, asking myself, was this as bad as I remembered? Is it going to be as bad as I remembered? And I watched it, and except for the age, seeing it at 10 years old versus seeing it at 48 years old, it was just as bad. Okay. I remembered every detail of it. So, I can say this about Gaspar Noé. He wasn't being gratuitous.
Okay.
It was an ugly, disgusting act that in order to tell that story, it was intricate to that story, and the style in which he told the story made it somehow more, it made it a much more sad, it made it a much sadder experience.
Okay.
With Enter the Void seems to me to be just style. It's all fucking style, and it's in your face, and
Maybe.
he wants you to know that people fuck. Okay, yeah, I can see that. There's nothing new in this film. There's nothing in this film that really makes me take a step back and wonder about the human condition, the experience. I don't walk away from it feeling as though I understand anything any better.
Well, that's basically like the opposite of how. Not to say that I feel like, oh my God, I saw this film and now I understand the human condition.
Yeah.
That's not it. But
understanding the human condition is sometimes being forced to face certain truths that push your hand and make you ask more questions and examine things more thoroughly.
Yeah.
Tideland did that. The Tree of Life definitely does that. Tideland to a much lesser degree. EO does that. Al-Hassad Balthazar do that. This film doesn't do that. This film seems like it's I'm just going to beat the shit out of you sensorially. I think I'm going to hit you with these fucking images, and I'm an experimenter of drugs and hallucinogens, and I want to try to capture that as closely in a narrative on screen as possible. Part of the problem is this is a film as large as our TVs are in our home viewing systems. This might be a movie that is more suited for the big screen. As many times as I've seen Terry Gilliam's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, I've only seen it in a movie theater twice, and both viewings in a theater I found very difficult by the end of that film.
I think we may have come upon something.
Maybe. I don't know. You keep digging, you're going to hit marrow.
Based on what we were talking about before we recorded in our tennis match.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
But, I mean, look, Tideland, I don't think I was in a similar position to where you're at with this film. I think it's a different perspective, but I was in a position where I was just like, what's my way in? I don't know. Like and this is, we're engaging with these films and trying to get into these different dimensions, right?
Yeah.
And part of it to me was like, well, I don't know. And then I watched it again with volume down, and then it was like, this is elevates it to the, and so it's like, yeah, is it all aesthetic? Is it blah, blah, blah? The aesthetic, the look is the way in, I think. But I think maybe as with it to use, because the themes of this film, which it is heavy in themes, so it's not just fucking porn.
No, it's not porn. I wouldn't. There is artistry here.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is like, although it's artistry or not, it's not just, I think, maybe to titillate and to like visually provoke and all that. I think that's part of it, but I think that it's kind of like maybe as with the drugs, maybe you need to take more. And what I mean is like, and I don't mean literally taking more drugs. I just mean if you take a certain dose of a certain compound, it'll get you to a certain place.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes what you need, for example, Terence McKenna, and I'll talk about Terence McKenna more in terms of a genealogy of the ideas of this film. But Terence McKenna, who was like a more popular in the 90s as a kind of inheritor of Timothy Leary and psychedelics, and he was a psychedelic basically ambassador, and an ethnobotanist, talks about DMT, which is featured in this film, and we're going to get into this. On this journey, in order to make this trip, for example, you're smoking, you take 2 hits, and it takes you to a certain place, but you need to take the 3rd hit. And the 3rd hit will take you across the Saran Wrap sound into the next dimension, whatever that is. And that's where you get the good stuff. So I think what you're missing is, it's like you're maybe not going beyond the visuals, because you're like, well, this doesn't have anything beyond the visuals. And I think it does. I think thematically, what is it talking about the human condition? What does it get at? It gets at love, sex, death, these things that are primordial drivers of the human condition. Our parents, our family, the people we have sex with, the people we want to have sex with, and all of these subconscious, unconscious, mixed up, animal, higher self, blah, 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 feelings and emotions. Now throw that into the death process, the life process, the re-seeing your life as you die, because this is a film about a trip it's a trip within the trip. The person dies, and what happens when you die, his life flashes before him, but he actually travels and is experiencing in fragments and through the distance of death, moments of his life, but also the existence of those around him, the people that he cares about, the people that he's interacted with, and he's seeing moments from their lives from the distance as a ghost, as a spirit, right? So it is this kind of meditation. When you say that term, it makes you think about like meditation as a peaceful, calm, contemplative. It's not that. This is a meditation on the human condition, a meditation on dying and on living and on memory. But as they say, on acid. So I think the themes are there. It just may not be accessible to an individual person for whatever reason. I think it's all subjective. How you get in, how you want to get in, how you don't get in, whatever. But the two central like pillars of the film are psychedelics and the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
So, I'll take you on another trip within the conversation of this film, which is a trip that may at the very least, will help maybe some people kind of understand how those things got mixed so that they could be presented as a film in 2009 by Gaspar Noé as a popular cultural artifact. So allow me.
Please.
The Tibetan Book of the Dead features in the film. A friend of the main character is like, they take drugs, they go to, already the film let me back up. The film begins with these unique opening credits, these title cards that are kind of unique to Gaspar Noé, that are they're unfriendly to the epileptic.
Hey, to say the least, yeah.
They fucking flash. They're super colorful. They're like, I don't know, 60 frames per second, whatever. It's really fast, like flashy thing. All kinds of different fonts, all kinds of different typography. I'm already like, I like it because I like flash. I like flashing images, and I like graphic design. So I like different fonts and all that shit. And then it's with electronic dance music playing, EDM.
Yeah.
So already there is a place where this is going. So now they're into this. They go to these clubs, blah, blah, blah. The Tibetan Book of the Dead finds its way into this film how? Well, what's the Tibetan Book of the Dead? The Tibetan Book of the Dead is basically, as we have it in our society at this place in history, it's a Western-oriented compilation of Tibetan Buddhist literature. The title itself is misleading because the title is presented, so it evokes the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead it's just an anthology, a collection of different writings. And there's a scholar named Donald Lopez Jr. He says that it's more of an American text than anything else. He says it's not really Tibetan because it's through an American presentation. It's not really a book because it's a compilation, and it's not really about the dead because some of the stuff in it is very much about prescriptions for those who are alive. So the thematics of it is about the bardo, the intermediate state between life and rebirth. That's what you're going to see in this film. The intermediate state between death. I don't know if I said life or death, but it's the intermediate state between death and rebirth. Why between death and rebirth? What does that mean? Well, in Buddhism, you have a cycle. It's called the samsaric cycle. Samsara is the cycle of birth, death, rebirth, from time without beginning. So that's what happens according to in the greater Indian religions and in Buddhism as well, because it's an Indian religion. So the goal as a Buddhist is nirvana, to be liberated from that cycle. Okay, so this is a film about that place in between when someone dies and they're reborn. Because the idea is you will be reborn, but there are intermediate states. So this guy named Walter Evans Went in the mid-20s gets people to translate and compiles this book that he calls the Tibetan Book of the Dead, right?
Yeah.
But with different forewords and introductions, he puts this Western esoteric occult kind of spin on the text that's based on spiritualism of the late 19th century or the late 1800s. Think seances, that type of shit, spiritualism. That's also an element of the ghosty kind of focus that it also finds its way into this film. There's a heavy influence on this guy's work by a woman named Madame Blavatsky, and she's one of the founders of Theosophy, and the idea is that there are these secret masters that are in contact with her, and they're from the Himalayas, the Himalayan mountains, and we're in Tibet. And side note, that's going to have an influence on a lot of other shit that at some point we touched on and will touch on. A lot of 60s counterculture shit. Think of Kashmir, Led Zeppelin, Sit with elders of a gentle race this world has seldom seen. Talk of days for which they sit and wait. All will be revealed. Those are these masters, these hidden masters. Also, side note, I know I'm going on. This is a fucking trip. We're tripping right now. So
you've taken the
love it or hate
DMT, so it's like, where the
Love
hell are
it
we
or hate
going?
it.
You know? Yeah.
Side note, some of her shit inspires Nazis. You have occult elements of Nazi expeditions to Tibet, the Ananurba. Himmler, he's into esoteric, what is esoteric Nazism, Ariosophy, Arianism. The swastika is a form of that wheel. It's also related to lightning or thunderbolts. The Tibetan branch of Buddhism is the Vajrayana, the thunderbolt vehicle. So there's a lot of things that are going to influence a lot of things. Going back to the Tibetan Book of the Dead as it's originally compiled, you get depth psychologist and archetype psychologist Carl Jung. He writes a translation, commentary on the book, and puts in his shit. He's gonna influence Joseph Campbell, who's gonna influence George Lucas. It ends up in pop culture, right? These things are flowing in. After Carl Jung, later Aldous Huxley. He puts his spoon in the book. Aldous Huxley, who's that? Well, he wrote Brave New World, dystopian book. He wrote The Doors of Perception. That is about psychedelics. The Doors of Perception. We're going into how does this shit get into pop culture? Doors of Perception is a line taken by William Blake. Who does it inspire? Jim Morrison, who's into psychedelics, into this type of shit too. It's going into the 60s. Aldous Huxley also wrote about perennial philosophy. The idea that all religious rivers or spiritual rivers lead to the same ocean. This is part of, now you're getting a lot of scholars that are bringing in ideas that are non-Western, spiritual, religious, that they're bringing them into the West and they're importing them, and they're going to be taken up by Westerners and a lot of Americans. Aldous Huxley hooks up basically with Timothy Leary. He hooks up with Richard Alpert, who later becomes Ram Dass, and he hooks up with Ralph Metzner, and he's like, check this book out. It's the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Well, before even that's happening, the beat poets are they're looking at the work of D.T. Suzuki. They're looking at the work of, he was mentioned in Alan Watts. He was mentioned in Her. He's this philosopher who's bringing in Eastern ideas also about Buddhism, Taoism, etc.
Yeah. So
now Kerouac, Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, to a lesser extent William Burroughs, are looking at this shit. There's drugs, there's this, there's that. Now Timothy Leary gets a hold of it. Well, Aldous Huxley turned him on to it, right? So now they write the psychedelic experience, which is based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but now it has an LSD component. So now it's a mixture of this in-between state of death and rebirth that is itself a trip, but now what does that have to do with when you're tripping on LSD? And what does that have to do with the ego? Or what does it have to do with being dissociated from your identity as you travel in these spaces? By the late 60s, John Lennon is influenced by the book. There's a Beatles song called Tomorrow Never Knows. It says, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. Turn off your mind. It's a quote from that book. And Gary Lackman writes about occultism in popular culture in a book that he called "Turn Off Your Mind." He was a bassist for Blondie. So by the 60s, you have this translation plus Eastern religion, including Tantra, which what part did Americans embrace about Tantra? They embraced all the sex shit. Plus psychedelics, and you get this countercultural piece of documentation now that's associated, that's way, way distant from whatever its origins are, to now being this American countercultural artifact. With the hippies as inheritors of the hipster beatniks. You have Philip K. Dick writing books, sci-fi, trippy shit based on it. Now by the 90s, you get the emergence of rave culture, mixing with EDM, electronic dance music. Rave culture embraces psychedelics and trance states, particularly MDMA, which is ecstasy. That's when you would see the pacifiers, Molly, all that. To a lesser extent, LSD, ketamine. You're doing the techno, the house, the drum and bass, the jungle, all that music, right? Terence McKenna, who I mentioned earlier, is now in the 90s as the inheritor of Timothy Leary, the inheritor of Aldous Huxley, promoting psychedelics as a way to expand one's consciousness, proponent of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is featured in this film. He's a champion of rave culture. You have Techno Acid Beat, this album by Psychic TV, Genesis Peorage, who was a founder of industrial music and the band Throbbing Gristle, which is featured in this film. You have another band called Coil, which they're doing I think it's called Love's Secret Domain, 1991. Their music is featured in the film. So it spins back to occultism and psychedelics. So by the 2010s, you get the Joe Rogans of the world, the Duncan Trussells, talking to Terence McKenna's brother Dennis on their podcasts, or in these settings, doing documentary, The Spirit Molecule, about DMT. Joe Rogan, what does he talk about? He talks about ayahuasca. Now that's something that's in pop cultural dialogue. This Amazonian psychoactive drink that contains DMT. They're talking about psilocybin, the magic mushroom. They're talking about stoned ape theory. One of Terence McKenna's theories is that early humans, in the wake of these cattle and with climatic changes to the savannas and whatever, they're following these cattle and they're finding mushrooms and they're eating them as they're dense in nutrients or whatever, but they're psychoactive. So now it's affecting the way they see, and it's basically having an impact on a positive evolutionary impact on the human brain. So it's like development through psychedelics. So basically, what is it? We're stoned apes. Not really a theory, but a kind of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
This is by the 2010s. It's these ideas are getting more and more into popular culture through these niches that come directly from a genealogy, where now people are like, oh yeah, LSD and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, man, and blah, blah, blah. And around the same time, what's happening? This movie comes out. This movie is coming out around the same time that Joe Rogan is talking all this shit on his podcast. So, whatever it is, this film, Enter the Void, lives here as a child of all of these elements that go into the culture and cultures of drug experimentation, hand in hand with this book, to now tell this story about a guy who takes a trip on psychedelics and then dies, and then takes a trip, a spiritual trip, to basically find himself in that intermediate state between death and rebirth, seeing his sister having sex through the perspective of the guy having sex with his sister, seeing these memories, a la tree of life of childhood, back to his mother, seeing ejaculations, seeing people dying, seeing people being born, seeing people breastfeeding. So this long and winding road, pardon the Beatles reference, is in a tradition of psychedelics, which rave culture is part of that, electronic dance music. He starts it with the title cards. It's in the tradition of counterculture. It's in the tradition of shock culture also. But it's also in the tradition of Tree of Life and that kind of narrative which is also, you started at the top with 2001, which is in the tradition of this kind of esoteric, mind-altering or mind-altered looking, visually stunning, hard to access film from the mind and perspective of potentially a hard to access director, whether it's Kubrick, and I'm not putting them together because I think they're on the same level. I don't know if they are or they aren't, but the Kubricks, the Malicks, and the Noés.
Mm-hmm. I can't take anything away from his visual power. There's some very there's some incredible imagery in here. It's not imagery, images, and you're seeing this movement through this this neon Tokyo and the what you imagine the psychedelic visuals are. There's a lot about that aspect that I like. However, over an hour, over a 2.5 hour, 2 hour and 41 minute time period, it simply becomes repetitive, and it no longer means anything. Not really. It doesn't seem to have a point to it any longer, because it meanders for so long that you never it meanders so long, and it never goes to another level. It keeps coming back to a story that doesn't work, perhaps because of bad acting, perhaps because of I think it's a great paint job on a shitty fucking car. If you want to create an analogy, I think there's a lot of
I like the analogy.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I like it.
That's how I feel about the film. I feel that Gaspar Noé is I think he's going for something without. I think he's a little bit too caught up. I think he's probably. I would have to see an interview with him to see. My fear is that he'd be sitting there like Coppola, 78, 79, talking about my movie isn't about Vietnam. My movie is Vietnam. You know, this movie isn't about drugs. This movie is a drug. This isn't about dying. You know,
that's Dali. That's fucking Dali. When they asked him, like, if he took drugs, and he said, "I am drugs."
I am drugs.
Only
But
when
for-
Dali. Why is it that? I mean, maybe you disagree, but I think when Dali does it, I agree. When Coppola does it, it's like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because, I mean, obviously Vietnam has its own a bunch of other shit that makes you go fuck you to Coppola, versus Dali. You're like, I cannot argue with you.
Yeah. No, Dali is drugs. Dali is.
But can you argue? But can you argue with Noé at this point?
I'd have to see the interview. So it makes me.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just saying, in the sense of, you bring up like him saying, "Well, this film is drugs."
Yeah.
Number one, can you argue with him, or do you side with him the way we're pretending that we're going to side with Ali?
Yeah.
And number two, is it only about drugs? And I argue that it's not.
I think it's more than just drugs, and I think there's something to be said for the out of body experience, the spirituality of it. But when you start bringing up like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which you're pulling out of the film, I'm not saying that you're bringing it up. You know, this has aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. No, it's right there in the film. This goes towards, and I don't want it to sound like a fucking hot buzz, a hashtag cultural appropriation, but one of the things that bothers me about cultural appropriation is like it's a hot topic, and it's something that you put out there, and it's like you want to slam somebody because you want to get on somebody's ass.
Wait, that I put on
not you. I'm talking about the public in general. When they start talking about the problems of cultural appropriation, what they're talking about is stealing somebody else's culture. Well, I don't agree with that so much. I don't agree with the idea of it being stealing somebody else's culture. What I consider it, and more closely, as bastardizing somebody's culture. So when you see millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, and they're talking about American Indian cultures, and they're talking about Two Spirits, or they're talking about the experiences of Native American and how that supports certain movements in today's society. I hate the idea of cherry picking what you think about a culture to support your idea, because because in truth, you don't really understand the culture. To call yourself a Buddhist means a dedication to Buddhism and a true understanding of, like, I can't even say if I can't even be sure if I would call it a religion. I don't know enough about Buddhism to call it a religion in the same sense of Western religion that I was raised with.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah,
So I don't know.
That's a different, deeper conversation.
That's the thing.
The book, but the book is the whole point, and a couple things, and I don't want to cut you off, but what I want to get in is that I bring it up to demonstrate that it is itself, that the film, as an artifact of its time, is connected to and it contains within it the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is an artifact of its time and of the cultures through which it passed. And that it is a countercultural text, in the same way that the film is a countercultural text. And it can be read as the film and the book as just like, oh, wow, trippy, man. And then cast aside. Or you can look at it as, yes, trippy, but also there are deeper things beyond the trip. That gets back to what I'm saying is like, it's not that it's just drugs, it's that you didn't take enough. And so that's why I bring it up, and not And not to say that, because you brought this up in the past also, is like, well, I'm not bringing it up because I'm like, well, because I know about these things, it makes me enjoy the movie more.
No.
Because I'm bringing it to the movie. I'm just bringing this up to people who are listening and to you who maybe you know it, maybe you don't. Its place in this kind of genealogy so that you can see it as the text that it is and why there's the mix of psychedelic plus this journey of after death. In terms of the cultural appropriation aspect of it, the original compilation that is the Tibetan Book of the Dead that has since been reworked and retitled and all this other stuff, and there have been other reworkings of the book that have their own things that are applied to them because it's all spin. And getting into religion itself, religious texts tend to have that. That tends to happen with religious texts is that who's dealing with the text and what are they putting into the text? What are their it's against the wind. What to leave in, what to leave out. That's its own issue. It's just like film editing. Does this film need to be fucking 3 hours or can we leave some shit out? Who knows? It depends. It's also cultural appropriation. It's also this again going back to Lopez is like at this point the text is an American text. Well, it's an American countercultural text. Popular leading up to the 60s, and then I don't know if it actually had a resurgence in the 90s. I don't know if ravers were into this. I don't know if now, EDC goes back to the 90s. I don't know if now people are like, oh yeah, EDC, but I'm going to fucking have my Tibetan Book of the Dead in my backpack. I don't know. But, Joe Rogan is still talking about fucking psychedelics and people are learning about them or whatever. And now this Netflix has fucking documentaries and all this stuff about psychedelics that you can see, and people are now looking at it in terms of therapeutics and stuff that research has been going on for a long time. But now it's more and more into the popular consciousness aside from just counterculture. So it's appropriated in terms of the going way back, sure, but at this point, the book itself is just part of the scene. To a greater or a lesser extent, but it is part of the scene.
I can't deny that. I mean, I'm not versed in it. I'm not versed in that historical aspect of everything. So I'm willing to take that ride with you as you go through it. The question becomes, with a greater knowledge of that, does that make this a better film?
I mean, you had asked me earlier, you had said, did I think it was a success? I mean, in terms of what? In terms of money? No, it wasn't a success. In terms of
financial isn't the thing. Tree of Life wasn't a financial success. We're not talking about that. What I'm saying is, do you think of, can you see a clear vision that the filmmaker has and, an idea that is fully expressed, that there's artistic success and then there is success in execution?
But here's the thing is like, I'm just getting hung up on success because we don't know, we don't have access to his mind to where he's like, okay, this is what I want to do. And then at the end of the process, he's like, this is all I got, or I did it. I did do it. I did achieve this. I did blah, blah, blah. All that we have is what he finally agreed to release. And all I know is that my understanding of it is that he wanted us to take this ride, and we took the ride.
Yes.
That's not about success or failure. That's about, did you enjoy the ride? Here are the problems that I had with the ride as an art form. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
We have been. You have been, especially. But in terms of success, I don't know. I mean, the last time I went to Guatemala, was it a success, or did I just go and I got sick and then I had a good time and then I came back? And what did I learn from it? Okay, I did that, but was it a success? I don't know.
Well, I've always told people that I've never been disappointed by a Coke story. You know what I mean? Like I've never been disappointed by anybody. I have a hierarchy of addictive stories. Marijuana, weed stories are incredibly boring to me. They're always just pointless. Alcohol stories are a little bit more. Alcohol stories are fun. Coke stories are, and it's the adventure of the story. Now, does that make it a Coke addiction or Coke use good for any reason? No, but the story. Now, in comparison to your Guatemalan trip, there are many. It could have went really sideways. Mm-hmm. You could have died in fucking Guatemala.
Well, yeah, you could die in our living rooms.
You could. But it's the adventure of doing a thing and coming back from it. It's the survival of it. And I know it's a cliche, but that which doesn't kill you makes for a fucking great story.
Okay. Well, what happens when you die in the story?
That makes for somebody else's good story.
So is it Gaspar Noé's good story? I
don't know. Because maybe it's a good story for an idea and intent, and I'm going to tell this story of what happens in the moments after you die and the reflection. I like the idea of reflecting. I like the idea of looking back on your life and seeing the points where everything either went wrong or evolved into the thing that you would be, or helped you evolve into the thing that you would become. Mm-hmm. The men and women that we are, from that car crash to seeing your parents fuck in that movie, or just even betraying a friend and then ultimately having it come back because the character fucking his associate or friend's mother. That's basically the point where he seals his fate.
Yeah.
At least in this timeline of the story.
Right.
That might not have happened, and it could have gone on and he could have died, an even worse death, or it could have played out in addiction. You don't know, that's an interesting aspect. Noé makes it difficult to connect by never. Noé makes it difficult to connect by shooting it over the shoulder from that perspective. When has this ever been done? Well, it was done in the 1940s in I think it was a Marlowe film called Lady in the Water or Lady in the Lake. Dick Powell I think it was Dick Powell that played Marlowe, and it was told from this perspective. That film doesn't work for me. This style of filmmaking does not work for me. Having somebody talk directly to the camera as if the camera was a person, it's contrived, I think. I don't think it's hard to sell out to that. Contrived. What's that?
All cinema is contrived. We all know that we're watching a movie.
Yeah, but
do you want to
definitely a negative contrivance? Yes. I want to be absorbed into a story. It would seem that carrying yourself as a character in the story, in the way that Noé shoots this, as the way that Marlowe film was done as this is almost like a first shooter Nintendo game or whatever other video game that you want to talk,
first person
yeah,
player
first person player game. That shit doesn't interest me. It doesn't work for me. There's a disconnect from it. I like it to play out.
There's a virtual reality aspect. See, this is interesting because this is where you get like this kind of paradox, because it's like the idea when you think of virtual reality or the first person or any of this kind of stuff is that the idea is that it's supposed to make you feel like you're immersed in it because it's from your perspective. I mean, this is not always that, because he shifts, because sometimes it's like you said, it's these crazy crane shots up from above. Sometimes it is looking at the person from that person's perspective on the main character, but then it'll switch. But you're saying that it actually takes you out, because you're saying, well, I'm looking at I'm looking at a movie.
It's very strange, because Noé's inspiration was both the Marlowe film from the 40s, but also Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days from the 90s.
Well, that's what I was going to talk about. Yeah, go on. Because
and I'll tell you why it works with Strange Days. Strange Days works because in that opening is so frenetic, but it doesn't feel right. It has the same feeling as this. And then you discover what she's doing with it, where you realize, oh, this is a memory implant. This is a memory that has been recorded onto a file that you can now play in your head, which later on, with little aspects of like a young woman with big tits bathing, there's that shot. But you get to that rape scene, and you understand.
There you go with your rape scene.
Always. It always goes back to a fucking rape scene. But the way they detail that as not only the drug that is being peddled in Strange Days is not just a visceral, emotional connection to other people. It's because you were no longer to create those emotional experiences on your own.
Yeah.
So it works in that film. There's context in that film that works.
As artificial, though.
Yes, as artificial.
And that's why VR was always going to be it was going to be at the vanguard of games and pornography, because the idea was to put yourself in there. Now, see, in this, it's like there is no, okay, this is a headset now. It presents it to you as reality, but you view it as contrived. Now, if you go to psychedelics, the other side of, or another aspect of that, or a dual or parallel paradox to it is that a lot of times with psychedelics, you come away with this feeling of connectedness, this feeling of either empathy or it has on the one side and different. Obviously, there are different psychedelics that have their different like modalities, right? You have your mescaline, your peyote, the cactus button used in the Native American church, Carlos Castaneda, all that type of stuff. You have LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, your acid, your tabs, your drops, your sugar cubes, whatever. The magic mushroom, psilocybin. You've got ecstasy, MDMA. You've got your fucking ketamine, disassociative shit. You've got your DMT, where, as Terence McKenna described, you go to this, and the question is it a state or is it a place? Because people who take it report feeling like themselves, but now they're transported to this other place where they encounter entities. And these entities have been described by McKenna as machine elves, also as jeweled, self-dribbling basketballs that look like Fabergé eggs. And they laugh at you, and they kind of like encourage you to, if you're on a certain train of thought that you're telepathically communicating with them, they tell you, keep going with that, and they laugh, and they change, and they transform in front of you. And so with these different modalities of psychedelics, you come away feeling like there is another, more real than real is something that often gets repeated. There's another reality, potentially, right? Or an inner reality. And that maybe you see that there is a fabric through fucking the space-time continuum and through all of fucking life on Earth, blah, 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 and beyond, that is connected. Sometimes through the loss of your ego, sometimes your ego remains intact, but now you're being presented with this other information, whatever that is. The paradox here with that is that in a film like this that is so maybe challenging or in your face or whatever, for someone like you, you didn't get that sense of connectivity. You didn't get that sense of empathy. No. You didn't get, because there was the distance. So in that sense, it's the film actually, it didn't draw you in, it pushed you away.
Well, there's also the fact that since I've never used psychedelics, I have nothing to back into. This film doesn't create a visceral, it doesn't bring back any memories for me. I don't step into this world with any kind of understanding. Whereas in other films about drugs, I have enjoyed that trip a little bit more. Maybe because this is supposed to be a little bit more real, I guess. I guess he's trying to create a true hallucinogenic acid trip. All I know is that from the humanistic aspect of the narrative, I feel that there is a failure to convey a true understanding of what this story is supposed to be.
Well, okay. I don't understand what you mean by a true understanding of what it's supposed to be, because you're an outsider who can't get into the film. So how the fuck would you know what's a true understanding of what it's supposed to be?
Because he's still dealing with characters that you can relate to, that you can see. Brother, sister, a family separated early on by a car accident tragedy, a brother and a sister who have made a pact to commit to one another and are ripped apart. Moving into the future, a brother who has dedicated himself to getting his sister back into his life and selling himself into this world of drugs. So this is a standard narrative.
Right.
I've seen this story.
Yeah, from that aspect. The basis it's not,
yeah, the basis is the flour. The cake that it's going to become is like, now what are the other ingredients that we're going to add to it? What other elements that are unfamiliar to me? So
okay.
I still relate to this film on a humanistic narrative level.
Okay.
But the drug aspect of it, if I go by the descriptions that people have told me about the enlightenment of hallucinogens, about opening that third eye and seeing things differently, maybe there's a disconnect between that and this experience. But whether or not I relate to the story is fucking relatable. It's simplistic. It's really simplistic.
Yeah, the basis, which is family, and
and that's why
which
I'm
is the
talking
basis of
about
Tree of Life.
Yeah, but that's all I'm talking about here. With it's like but the Tree of Life.
Yeah, why
is
is that a
even
success
better.
and
Well,
this one
well,
not?
here it is, because the Tree of Life dispenses altogether with any kind of narrative. There is no narrative there. There is if you want to call it a narrative, then we can argue that point. But but at the end of the day, that's more of a character study of. I don't even think it would be considered a character study. I would consider it a portrait of life. As things are happening, because there is no growth of the character as far as experiencing a mission that takes them from one place to another.
Right, there's no
outside
plot.
of the idea. There's no plot
story
outside of the experience of living and changing from one point in your life to another point in your life as you mature and grow older, and maybe realize that your dad is a shit, or that your mom is weak, or that you're selfish in regards to both of those two things. This has a very basic narrative that just is overwhelmed by style and these ideas that he has that he wants to elevate, like to see people conceive for 5 or 7 minutes at the end of the film as people are fucking, and then you could see bodies glowing, and then you see the movement of spermatozoa towards the eggs, and okay, I get what you're saying. At this point, you're going for a grander theme, which edges towards pretension, which edges towards.
But why does it edge towards pretension if it's a grand? Like what makes 2001 not edge towards pretension, and what and
2001. I mean, depending on who you ask, it could be pretentious. I don't think it is, because you walk away from it asking questions. You walk away from it wondering what the hell. The great thing about 2001, and I still feel this, for as many people who say they understand that film, I think there is validity, and I think there is beauty in not understanding the film totally.
Of course, yeah, I agree.
I love people say, well, this is what. No, that's. You don't know. You don't really know what the fuck that movie is about. You have ideas of what that movie is about.
Yeah.
You know what Star Wars is. What's that?
It's kind of unknowable.
That's right.
To a certain point.
And it's meant to be that.
After a certain point.
Yeah. You know what Star Wars is about. Star Wars is, right. You know what that's about. 2001, you're not going to know. Tree of Life, you have a little bit clearer of an idea, but it's also a much. I think it's because it's so close to who we are, and we all have an understanding of childhood, but we also forget about what childhood really was.
Okay.
So in a sense, it's even more vague than 2001. That's not what this is.
Should this have gone? Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you think that it should have gone fucking crazier and dispensed? You said Tree of Life dispenses with plot.
Yeah.
Should is like fuzzy word, but had it done that, do you think maybe you would have been like more willing to take that ride, because you're like, right now it's like, well, this is the basic narrative with drugs on top, and it's just like there's a lot of fondant, but there's not a lot of cake there.
Well, I'll tell you what. Do you remember in the 90s, early 90s, late 90s? I know you remember the 90s. I don't remember the name of the group, but I remember a video that I saw on MTV, and I only saw it once.
Okay.
And it was for a song called "Smack My Bitch Up."
How did I know you were going to say that?
Because that's what this movie is.
Go on.
That 3 or 4 minute video kicked the shit out of me when I saw it. And I remember, because I used to scour. I used to fucking, I have been a night owl insomniac. I don't know if I'm an insomniac, but I'm definitely a night owl. And I remember you staying up till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning watching TV. It was the worst thing that ever happened. TV, Paul Mooney used to say, TV used to go to sleep. Now, these motherfuckers, you know? And I remember seeing that at like 1:30 or 2 in the morning. Smack my bitch up. Smack my bitch up. And, you know, it's so weird. And then you realize it's a chick. It's fucked up. And I remember the visceral reaction because it was overwhelming. Now, could you do that over a 2.5 hour period? I don't know. I think it would be exhausting. I think it would kick the shit out of you.
So you're calling for...
what I'm saying is that 4 or 5 minute video...
You want the Prodigy to have directed this fucking film.
Yeah. That 4 minute video was better than this fucking movie.
Well, I mean, maybe it was... Look, I'm going to argue that it's probably better because it was 4 minutes.
Maybe. But I'm arguing that it was better in the sense that it grabbed a hold of me and it didn't let go. And I walked away from it like, holy fuck, I can't wait to tell somebody about this. I'm
watching the thing right now.
You watching the video right now?
Yeah. I've already seen it, but I remember it. But I have it playing right now in the background. That leads me to wonder what his... Because I've seen all of his films, Gaspar Noé, except for his latest one.
Yeah.
And so I am curious about his short films, because, and I know he's done music videos too. So now I'm like, how much of that is just fucking length? Because it's like, how do you sustain... That's another thing. It's like, how do you sustain a fucking film that is not a traditional fucking Godfather film or whatever for that amount of time when it's again, it's going to be so heavily visually oriented. That's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to get people to stay with it and to write it out like that.
But that comes with an understanding of what the medium is. Now look at Scorsese with The Wolf of Wall Street. The Wolf of Wall Street is definitely not my favorite Scorsese film, but that has a frenetic energy that makes sense in the film that is, in the story that is being told. And it keeps you, I feel that film keeps you engaged throughout. It's a different kind of film. It's a way different kind of film. It's a way different kind of film. But the point is, Scorsese recognized the limitations and also the virtues of cinema and what could be done. With Gaspar Noé's film, I don't feel that because of the way that Enter the Void plays out, it leads me to believe that he doesn't understand the nuances of cinema in the same way. Yes, it's a different kind of film.
Curious.
What
are the nuances of cinema that he fails to understand?
He fails to understand that if you're going to tell a story about people, you have to have an emotional... Well, I'm going to get to it. You have to have an emotional connection to the characters that are being portrayed on that screen. Now, an emotional connection doesn't mean you have to like these people. You can hate them. You can like them. You can pity them. You can have empathy. You can have sympathy. You can have disgust for them. But there has to be a visceral reaction. It has to pour out of you. When you watch Taxi Driver, you're not sitting here going, oh, a lot of people might watch it and say, fucking Travis Bickle is a scumbag. Some people would say he's sad. I feel bad for him. I have sympathy and empathy for him. Some people would say, fuck him, he's evil. But it's a reaction. And it's a pointed, heavy one. What?
I said, I get you, but I think that I disagree, because I think that sometimes you can have a film where the characters who are in the film are not really there as people, they're there as symbols.
Give me an example.
I mean, you can apply the there are good ways that there are ways where it works multiply, and there are ways where it doesn't. But for example, in the films of Kenneth Anger, you have characters or figures that are specifically there as symbols, archetypes. They represent something symbolically, right?
Sure.
They're not there for you to, and also this is a different kind of cinema. They're not there for you to say like, oh my God, like I hate, like I can't, how could this have happened to that person? I feel for them, blah, blah, blah. I'm so invested in their fucking story arc, not blah, blah, blah. There are films like Star Wars where you have the characters that you're supposed to feel for them as characters, but at the same time, you can lay the symbology on top of them and say, this person is a symbol of this. This person symbolizes that. You can do that with The Godfather too.
Yeah.
I mean, not two, but I mean also.
Yeah, as well.
As well. And then there are kind of, you could even do that with some basic fucking like high school thing where it's like, okay, that's the jock, that's the hot chick, that's the smart girl, that's the whatever. I think that going back to this question of these challenges for viewers, in terms of the ideas of these different aspects within the context of what we've been looking at over the course of the last few weeks, whether it's emotional content, aesthetic, or just story, whether that is plot. What I mean, there's an old line that says story is like, and I don't know the exact order, but let's just say that the queen died and then the king died.
Yeah.
That's a story. A plot is the queen died and the king died of grief. That's a plot.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you slice it, if you take the elements of story, narrative, whether that is plot, whatever, you take the elements of emotion and you take the elements of aesthetic, obviously some films are able to balance those three in a degree that's, the crossfading in Godfather 2 and the lighting, the chiaroscuro and all that adds the sepia tones and the flashbacks are aesthetic choices that enhance the film. It has emotional content. It has a great story that you can follow. This is a certain kind of narrative. 2001 has great aesthetic, great music, great look, all of that. Does it have emotional content? It's a little bit, maybe you're going to say or someone will say it's cold, it's distant, blah, blah. The story, it's a little bit fuzzy, not sure.
But I think there is an emotional content there.
But that is very, very subjective.
Well, it's also a matter of projecting onto it, because you project.
Well, that is also subjective, what you receive and what you put in. But here's what I'm saying. I think that you, RickRamos, are very, very much engaged and connected with the emotional aspect of a film first, then story, and then aesthetic maybe last. This is a film that is going to be heaviest on aesthetic first, story second, and emotion last. So it's the exact opposite of kind of how you go into films. And I think you go into most of films that way. So I'm not undercutting what you say, because I agree with a lot of what you say, but we're also kind of getting at something that we've been getting at, is like this wrestling with ideas of like, how is it that certain films that are similar or responses to other films, one leaves you feeling one way, one leaves you not feeling another way, one reacts this way, blah, 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 blah.
Well, the thing about it, and what you describe, if that were the case, and there's going to be a purely aesthetic drive in this,
I'm not saying purely, but I'm saying that that's what it's primarily. I think the weight of it is going to be on that, because there is an emotional distance, and the narrative is, as you say, basic, and then it's also like meandering.
It meanders. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you were listening to the podcast, and you'll notice that we came to an abrupt stop. I fixed as best I could with the editing, but we're going to carry on from the idea that we had. And what we were leaving off with was this idea of, I guess, a film of pure imagery. And part of what I was talking about was, we were talking about the Tree of Life, the imagery in Tree of Life, 2001: A Space Odyssey, as compared to Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void. And what I was saying that I guess the argument was of pure imagery on the screen. What would you call it? What would you call it?
The argument, I think, is in the absence of, for someone like you, of emotional engagement, and in the absence of something more than what you would describe as a basic story with basic relationship points, and having not walked away with, according to you, like more of an understanding of the human condition. What's the how do you access a movie if it's going to be based purely on visuals? How does that get you into a film like 2001 on one side, Tree of Life on one side, versus Enter the Void on the other?
Well, the thing was, let's Enter the Void. I figured that what I was trying to get across was the idea that the imagery is beautiful. It's captivating. It's compelling. There are things in there that are comparable with a lot of especially with the digital arts that are possible now, as compared to the practical effects that were achieved by Douglas Trumbull in both Malick's The Tree of Life and Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey, not to mention the work that he did in Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. But you have to be able to balance that with, if you're going to include a story that's captivating, that is drawing you in, which is what I think he's trying to do. I think there is there's a basic story there that drags and takes away from the beauty of the images that he's coupling this with, so that ultimately it negates what you were seeing there. It doesn't necessarily negate, but it actually it diminishes. There's a level of diminishing returns on that. If you were to look at something like, and I was lucky enough to see both films in theaters in 70 millimeter, Baraka and Samsara, two of what I would consider the greatest movie watching experiences of my life. There's no story there, except for a generalized understanding of the human experience, humanity across the globe, cultures, species, life, death, all of that. And that's incredibly powerful. It's just incredibly powerful. And it's not dragged down by the weight of a faulty story or a badly directed or badly acted or even a badly conceived story. That was the point that I was trying to make. Barack Samsara being two examples of that, and the Qatsi trilogy, Koy and the Qatsi, and those films, which I haven't seen yet, but those films, talking about it makes me want to see those films even more. It makes me want to make the time to see those films. So that's where I'll leave off with that.
Yes, Samsara is named after that process that I'm telling you, the process of birth, death, and rebirth.
Yeah.
So it's tying into that. What did you think about the themes of the film, of this film, Enter the Void?
I thought they were very basic. I thought they were very, I mean, life, death, conception. It's all there. It's all basic stuff. It's all elemental, and
I mean, every Casablanca is
exactly.
Like, okay, love,
and
life, death. Okay, so okay, but
and that
the
statement
themes,
right there proves the point where it's the execution. It's what you do with it. It's how you manipulate those elements into a story that is compelling. What is the human element that really pulls you in?
I get it, but I mean, what did you think about it versus how did you react to it emotionally?
Well, I just thought there is no thinking about it. It's just, it's saying, oh, this is what they're dealing with. This is the story that I am being told. How, ultimately, it comes down to how well is the story going to be told? And I walked away from this bored, which means I'm disengaged. I would have rather something been difficult or offensive or uncomfortable, but there was nothing in this film that made me. I can see where the imagery where like the flashing or the wobbly camera work would cause a sense of vertigo or seasickness to somebody watching it, but thematically, the way the story itself was handled didn't affect me in any way. It left me cold. It left me bored. It left me feeling as though I was seeing half of a movie and not even a good half.
Yeah, we come at films very differently because it's all about like, and I mean, I understand this because it's like you're the one experiencing it. So it's like, how does it affect me? How do I feel? How do I take it? Like, does it engage me versus that level, but also the level of what are some of the ideas that are taking place through the film, besides just like, okay, I can name it as love theme, okay, death theme, whatever. I guess what I'm saying is like, to even step out of your own reaction to the film and discuss the film, I think is very difficult for you. And I mean, I understand it because all of us are experiencing everything from our own first-person point of view. Now, if we were to just break it down to, because we're playing this game of back and forth, these films as responses, each of us took this trip. Do I think that this is on the level, we got into this with Solaris, is Tarkovsky's Solaris to me on the same level as Tarkovsky's Stalker? No. Am I glad I watched Solaris? Yeah, I'm glad I watched it because it was a different experience. It was a different view, and it was even to compare with Stalker. Maybe it makes me appreciate Stalker even more. Maybe this film is like, to me, on another, it's the flip side of, it's the side B or whatever of Tree of Life in terms of takes place, if not 100% at night, mostly at night. And it's not 100% at night, but mostly at night. It is, most of it is death oriented. It is also memory, but it is that flip side. It's not even underworld; it's overworld, but through the shots, etc. I'm glad I took the trip. I encourage other people to take, regardless of what the outcome is, in terms of, to use your language of success and failure. Go on the trip, go on the ride. Maybe you'll take something from it. Maybe you won't. I'm glad I saw. I had already seen it, but also I challenge myself, you, Rick, other people who watch it, also, beyond how you feel about the film or how you don't feel about the film, engage those other aspects of, like, what does it make you think, other than just, and I mean, obviously, I'm not discouraging an emotional response to a film. Obviously, that's going to happen. It's an art form.
Yeah.
But it's also like, beyond that is the question of, like, how do you engage with themes other than emotionally? What do you think about them? What do they, this idea of what happens when you die, and this idea of going back and seeing this replaying of life, going backwards in time, going forwards in time. What do you think of that, and how do you find yourself, if that were an option for you? What does that make you think? And then how does that thought make you feel? Outside of just like, well, yeah, this movie wasn't really that interesting to me, so that's all it is. I think there is more to be gained from a film, even if it's not something that was like, wow, I was really wowed by this, or blown away by this movie. It's also like, well, what am I left with besides my impressions of the film? What are really, like, my thoughts on the film, other than the film as a film?
Well, I think one of the good things about this film, for me at least, is I'm walking away from it. Whenever I see a film that has a certain style and has a subject matter that I think, at least the story, could have been interesting, and the plot of this story is basic, but the idea of stepping out of the body and watching it is rife with potential, and it makes you ask the question, is there a better version of this? And in the process of discussing that and this film, I stumbled on a film in my memory that actually does it better. That actually does it with more style, with a more compelling narrative, better acting, better direction from a director that I don't particularly care for and have never cared for, but that I am interested in examining. So it's not a complete loss. There are some moments. It's crazy with talent, which I think Gaspar Noé is talented. You do have things that jump out at you, and there are moments in this film that do. But I think it has a good central idea with a bad execution, and that's why I consider it a problematic film and somewhat of a failure on that end. But you and I can talk next week about the film that this leads me to, and we'll know. Well, or at least we'll know for ourselves.
I'm eager to do that, but also I want to challenge, encourage, is that beyond thinking of a film that you watched as a film,
Mm-hmm.
and beyond the how what you think about it and its potential for a different film. Not only am I talking to you, I'm talking to everyone listening and myself. Is like when you think about ideas in any given film, let us not limit ourselves to those ideas in the context within the boundaries of that very film itself.
Yeah.
Or at most to how the ideas in that film can be executed in another film.
Mm-hmm.
Either better or worse or indifferent or whatever judgments we place on them. I'm saying I think there's more to cinema. We've already gone over, obviously, that there's more to cinema than just enjoyment and entertainment, which, I mean, it is great for that. There is also the Aristotle kind of what you're getting at is that you want to be engaged emotionally and to feel like there was an emotional payoff, or beyond that, you felt like you saw a perspective of humanity or the human condition. Okay. I'm also saying there are ideas and themes that we can think about within the film, but also let's take those ideas and step into the world outside of the movie theater, outside of the cinema, and engage with those ideas in our life, practically, but also just abstractly, just engage with those ideas as ideas, not limited to cinema, the history of cinema, art, or any of these other things.
Sure.
While at the same time understanding where this artifact fits into the history of cinema, art, etc. So movies are not just movies.
They're far more than just movies.
Yeah, and in every film are ideas, and even if it's a horrible film or a film you hate or a film you love or a film you whatever, engage with the emotional, but also engage with the idea and take that to a different trip outside of the film, beyond the film. Take that trip. Enter that void.
I agree totally. That's the episode, folks. Remember that if you want to support, you want to donate, you want to help us out a little bit, get us through the rough times, please go to buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. I got that right, correct?
Correct.
We appreciate everything that you do for us. We appreciate the continued love and support. Thank you very much.